Welcome to Life Stories, where real-life journeys unfold with every story. Today, we follow the unexpected path of Lily Thompson, a single mother struggling to make ends meet, facing eviction, and trying to start anew. In a chance encounter on a flight, she meets Ryan Mitchell, a successful CEO with a past that mirrors her own. Their meeting becomes the catalyst for a life-changing journey, filled with empathy, kindness, and the possibility of a brighter future. Join us as we dive into a tale of struggle, hope, and second chances. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. The last few months of my life had been nothing short of exhausting. A double shift at the diner followed by 3 hours of frantic calls with my landlord. All topped off by a last-minute flight to Portland with my daughter. Mia was the culmination of one of the hardest periods I'd ever endured. It was late in the evening when we made our way through Newark Liberty International Airport. The weight of our 2 carry-ons hanging heavily on my shoulders. I could feel the tension in my body, the exhaustion creeping up on me with every step. My arms ached, my mind was foggy from sleepless nights, and my heart was heavy with the knowledge that we had no home left to go to. I didn't know what to do anymore. The eviction notice that had come a week ago had thrown our world into complete chaos. The apartment we had called home for the past 3 years was now just another piece of the past. Another chapter of our lives that was being shut without any warning. Mia, bless her heart, had been staying with Mrs. Rodriguez, our kind elderly neighbor, while I worked my shifts at the diner. She didn't understand the gravity of the situation, but I did, and it was crushing. Mia tugged at my sleeve as we hurried through the terminal, her small face pinched with worry. "Mom, are we going to miss the plane?" she asked, her voice soft with sleepiness. I glanced at my phone. It was 10:47 p.m., and our flight was at 11:15. We still had time, but I could feel my heart racing as we pushed through the crowds, trying to get to the gate in time. I looked down at my daughter, who was half asleep already. "We'll make it, sweetie," I promised, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. But the truth was, I wasn't so sure. Our lives had been turned upside down. And this last-minute flight to Portland wasn't just a trip, it was our last shot at a fresh start. My sister, Kate, lived there, and she had offered us a temporary place to stay, maybe even a job at her company. But the road to that new beginning seemed daunting, especially with everything that had been thrown at us in such a short amount of time. When we reached the gate, the final boarding call was being announced. I could feel the tension in my chest as I handed over our boarding passes to the gate agent. The exhaustion was making everything blurry, and it felt like I was moving in slow motion. Mia, still clinging to my leg, let out a soft yawn. The flight attendant barely glanced at our tickets before waving us through. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as we made our way down the aisle of the plane, something didn't quite feel right. The cabin looked too nice. The seats too spacious. I kept telling myself that I was just tired, that maybe I wasn't seeing things clearly. But the confusion started to fade when I realized we had mistakenly boarded the first-class section. I felt my stomach twist with embarrassment. "Oh my God," I whispered, realizing that we were in the wrong seats. "I'm so sorry," I stammered as I began to gather our things, ready to move to the economy section. But just as I was about to get up, a deep voice interrupted me. "Let me help you with that," the man sitting next to me said, his voice warm and smooth. I turned to find a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his kind blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at me. He effortlessly lifted our bags into the overhead compartment, making it look like the lightest task in the world. "Thank you," I managed, too tired to feel embarrassed about needing help. I guided Mia into what I thought was our row, and we settled in. She curled up in the middle seat next to me, still half asleep, while I tried to get comfortable in the plush seat beside her. The man in the aisle seat settled in as well. His presence was calm, collected, and a part of me felt that strange pull of something being slightly off. But I couldn't quite place it. My exhausted brain was too foggy to make sense of it. The flight attendant soon came by offering champagne to the first-class passengers. That's when it hit me. The elegant lighting, the crystal glasses, the plush, Leather seats that seemed to embrace the man beside me as if the seat had been made just for him. My heart raced as I quickly realized our mistake. We were in first class. Not economy. We're in the wrong seats. I murmured, my face flushing. I started to gather our things again. But before I could act, the man interrupted. These passengers are with me, he said, smoothly pulling out a business card and handing it to the flight attendant. I upgraded them at the gate. He glanced at me with those kind blue eyes. His face serious but kind. Please ensure they're comfortable during the flight. The flight attendant's attitude shifted immediately. His demeanor suddenly respectful. Of course, Mr. Mitchell. My apologies for the confusion. I was speechless, my heart pounding. I looked at the man beside me again. Mr. Ryan Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Technologies. It didn't quite register at first. But then I felt something deep inside me, a sense of disbelief and confusion. Why was he doing this for us? Why had he gone out of his way to help us in such a way? I opened my mouth to protest. But Ryan held up his hand, cutting me off gently. Please, he said, his voice soft but insistent. The seats are paid for. Either way, and your daughter looks exhausted. Consider it a gift. Tears stung my eyes as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. How had I ended up in this place? Receiving such unexpected kindness? How had I gone from living in a cramped apartment, barely scraping by, to being seated in a luxury cabin with someone like Ryan Mitchell offering me his help? I was too tired to protest, too emotionally drained to fight it. Instead, I looked at Mia, who had finally fallen asleep against my arm. It had been such a long day for both of us. And as the plane began to ascend into the night sky, I felt a small spark of hope. Just maybe, things were starting to change for us. But there was still something familiar about Ryan. Something I couldn't quite place. His face, I'd seen it somewhere before. But where? My tired mind couldn't make sense of it. And for now, I let myself drift into a restless sleep, holding onto that glimmer of hope that had somehow managed to surface in the midst of all the chaos. As the flight continued, the dimming cabin lights and the soft hum of the plane's engines created an atmosphere of quiet. Despite the comfort of the first-class seat, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being out of place. My tired eyes kept glancing at Ryan, sitting next to me. There was something about him that seemed so familiar. He didn't look like anyone I knew, but his calm, confident presence made me think of someone from my past. Someone who had always made me feel safe and understood. It was unsettling. I turned my gaze back to Mia, who was still curled up beside me, her tiny body tucked into the crook of my arm. Her peaceful sleep brought me some comfort. I had been so preoccupied with our situation, so lost in the stress of everything falling apart, that I hadn't even noticed how much Mia had been affected. She deserved better than this. Better than the constant worry, the eviction, the uncertainty of it all. I let out a long sigh, my fingers absently tracing the fabric of my seat. Ryan glanced at me, sensing my unease. So, he said softly, his voice cutting through the silence of the cabin. Seattle, huh? Home for you? I nodded, not trusting my voice to carry much emotion. It's where my sister lives. Kate. She offered us a place to stay until we get back on our feet. I wasn't sure why I felt the need to explain. Maybe it was the kindness in Ryan's eyes. Or maybe it was because I didn't have to explain myself to anyone else. But somehow, I found myself telling him about the eviction. About the stress of trying to make enough money. And how everything had been falling apart in the span of a few short weeks. My landlord just gave up on us. I continued, my voice tinged with bitterness. I couldn't afford the rent anymore. And when I tried to talk to him, he just handed me the eviction notice like it was nothing. I paused, looking down at my hands. It's just hard, you know, being a single mom, trying to keep it all together. Ryan listened intently, his eyes focused on me, his expression softening with understanding. I wasn't used to sharing this much. But there was something about him that made it easier. It wasn't that I wanted his pity, far from it, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was really listening. Like someone truly understood what it was like to be pushed to the brink. I get it, Ryan said after a long pause. I've been there, too. Not exactly the same, But I know what it feels like to be at rock bottom, struggling to make ends meet, and not knowing where the next step is going to take you. I looked at him, surprised by his words. He had the kind of wealth and polish that screamed success. And yet, there was a vulnerability in his eyes, a depth that made me realize that we weren't so different after all. His life may have been different, but the weight of responsibility, of doing whatever it took to take care of those you love, was something we both understood. Ryan leaned back in his seat, his hand resting on the armrest. When I was in my 20s, he continued, I was a single dad. I worked 3 jobs, trying to make enough to support my son. It was tough, but there was one moment, just like what you're going through now, when someone showed me a bit of kindness. It changed everything. He paused, his gaze drifting toward the window. I never forgot it, and now, when I can, I try to pay it forward. His words left me speechless. Here I was, sitting next to a man who had been where I was, who knew exactly what it felt like to struggle, and yet he was offering me kindness and support without any hesitation. I felt the weight of his gesture, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things might get better. We didn't say much after that. The plane continued its steady ascent, the city lights below gradually fading into the distance. Mia shifted in her sleep, her small hand resting on my lap. I glanced at Ryan once more, this time with a clearer sense of understanding. There was more to him than the well-tailored suit, more to him than the polished persona he wore. He had a heart, and it was bigger than I could have imagined. Just as I was about to close my eyes, the flight attendant came by with the pre-flight champagne, offering it to the first-class passengers. I watched as Ryan politely declined, his attention still focused on me, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel hope that there were still good people in the world. And that maybe, just maybe, my luck was starting to change. As the night wore on and the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow, the gentle hum of the plane seemed to lull most of the passengers to sleep. But I remained wide awake, my thoughts spinning. The kindness Ryan had shown me was something I hadn't experienced in years, and it left me feeling both grateful and uncomfortable at the same time. I had always been the one to take care of things, to handle everything on my own. But tonight, I had been taken care of, and I wasn't sure what to do with that feeling. Mia was still sound asleep beside me, her little head resting peacefully against my arm. I stroked her hair softly, careful not to wake her. She deserved peace, a good night's sleep, something she hadn't had in a long while. As I sat there, trying to make sense of everything that had happened in the past few hours, I found myself stealing glances at Ryan. There was something about him that intrigued me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't just his good looks or his polished demeanor, it was the quiet confidence he exuded. The way he seemed to carry himself without arrogance, as though he had seen the worst of life and had come out stronger on the other side. And then, there was that nagging feeling, that sense of familiarity that kept tugging at the back of my mind. I couldn't place it, but I was certain I had seen his face somewhere before. Maybe it was just my tired brain, overthinking everything. Maybe it was nothing, but I couldn't shake it. Ryan caught me looking at him again and smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made my heart skip a beat. I quickly looked away, my face flushing with embarrassment. But he didn't seem to mind. In fact, he seemed comfortable, almost at ease with the connection that was starting to form between us. So, he said quietly, breaking the silence, "What's your plan when you get to Portland?" The question was simple, but it carried an unexpected weight. My initial instinct was to brush it off, to avoid talking about our uncertain future. But something about Ryan made it hard to keep my guard up. I sighed, glancing at Mia once more before answering. "We'll stay with my sister, Kate," I said, my voice soft. "She offered us a place until we can get back on our feet. Maybe even a job lead at her company. It's just, everything's been so chaotic lately. The eviction, the move, it feels like nothing is going the way I thought it would." Ryan nodded, listening intently, his expression soft but thoughtful. "I know the feeling," he said after a moment. "When my son was young, I lost everything. I had to start over from scratch. 2. It wasn't easy, but you do what you have to for the people you love. It takes time, but eventually, you find your way. His words hit me harder than I expected. There was something in his tone. Something that made me believe he understood exactly what I was going through. For so long, I had felt like I was the only one struggling. The only one trying to keep my head above water. But Ryan's words reminded me that I wasn't alone. There were others who had been through similar battles. Who had faced their own challenges and had made it through the other side. I didn't always have it easy. Ryan continued, his voice low. But I learned that sometimes, life throws you a curveball. The important thing is how you handle it. You don't give up. You just keep moving forward. I looked at him, meeting his gaze for the first time with a new understanding. Ryan wasn't just a successful businessman, he was a man who had fought for everything he had. Who had faced adversity head-on. And that made him all the more remarkable in my eyes. He wasn't offering me sympathy. Or pity. He was offering me empathy. A shared understanding of the struggle. Of the fight to create a better life for the ones you love. For a moment, I found myself wondering about his life. About what had shaped him into the person he was today. I didn't ask, though. I didn't want to intrude on his privacy. Just as I didn't want to share every detail of mine. But something told me that, in time, we would both learn more about each other. Life had a funny way of connecting people when they needed it the most. Just then, the flight attendant came by, offering champagne to the first-class passengers. Ryan declined, a polite but firm shake of his head. And I followed suit, not really in the mood for anything except a few more hours of sleep. But as the flight attendant moved on, I found myself feeling a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was the quiet rhythm of the plane. Or maybe it was the simple fact that, for once, I wasn't alone in this fight. The plane continued its steady journey. And I finally allowed myself to close my eyes. The gentle motion lulling me into a light sleep. As I drifted off, my last thought was that, somehow, despite everything that had gone wrong in my life, tonight felt like a small, but significant, turning point. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better. As the plane descended into Portland, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions, hope, uncertainty, and a deep sense of gratitude. The sky outside was painted with shades of pink and gold. A new day beginning as we prepared to land. I glanced at Mia, her face pressed against the window. Her eyes wide with wonder at the unfamiliar city below. It was a sight I had once dreamed of, a fresh start. A new beginning for both of us. But now, it felt different. It felt real. Ryan was still beside me. His calm presence offering a quiet reassurance. He hadn't pushed me to open up more than I was ready to. But he had listened when I needed someone to hear me. His words had given me something I hadn't felt in a long time. The possibility of a future beyond survival. Beyond just making it through the day. It wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone in my corner. We landed, and as I stepped off the plane with Mia by my side, I knew that this was only the beginning. The community center project Ryan was working on. The unexpected offer to be a part of something bigger. And the support I had received were all signs that life was taking a turn. A turn I hadn't expected. But one that felt like it had been written in the stars. Maybe the universe had a way of bringing people together. Even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. And maybe, just maybe, the best stories were the ones that weren't planned at all. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this life story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more inspiring stories. Life has a way of surprising us. And there's always more to share.